What if you were a king, a warrior, leading your men into the most critical battle of your life, but you already knew you were going to die? Not that you might die, but that your death was a guaranteed part of the plan, a price demanded by the gods themselves.
That's not a hypothetical scenario. That is the unbelievable reality for one man, King Leonidas of Sparta. Before he ever marched his men to that fateful pass, before a single Persian arrow was fired, he was carrying a terrible secret. He had journeyed to the most sacred and powerful spiritual authority in the ancient world, the oracle at Delphi. He went looking for a strategy, a path to victory. Instead, he was handed his own death warrant.
A death warrant? From the oracle?
The prophecy was chillingly specific. The oracle told the Spartans, "For you, inhabitants of wide-wayed Sparta, either your great and glorious city must be wasted by Persian men, or, if not that, then the bound of Lacedaemon must mourn a dead king from Heracles' line." The message was unmistakable. Sparta could be saved, but the price was the life of a king. And Leonidas, a direct descendant of the demigod Heracles, knew that price was his to pay. This fact changes everything we think we know about this battle. His mission wasn't to win, it was to die.
That's an almost unbearable weight to carry into battle. It completely reframes the entire story.
Absolutely. And for Leonidas, this prophecy transformed a military strategy into a sacred duty. It removed any possibility of retreat and framed his inevitable death not as a failure, but as a preordained, heroic sacrifice. It also gave him the ultimate political justification. A Spartan king couldn't just decide to lead his elite royal guard on a suicide mission. He'd be stopped by the Council of Elders, the Gerousia, and the powerful magistrates known as the Ephors. But who in Sparta could argue with the direct word of the god Apollo? The prophecy made the unthinkable not only possible, but necessary.
So on one side, you have a king marching to his prophesied death. Who was the man on the other side of the battlefield? Who was this force so immense that it required such a sacrifice?
He was Xerxes I, the Shah, the king of kings. He was the ruler of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, the largest and most powerful empire the world had ever seen. And he was not some simple cartoon villain. He was a complex figure, driven by a powerful mix of motivations. First and foremost, revenge. 10 years earlier, his father, King Darius I, had sent an invasion to Greece, only to be humiliatingly crushed by a smaller Athenian army at the Battle of Marathon. For Xerxes, this was a matter of family honor.
So it was personal for him.
Deeply personal, but it was also geopolitical. The invasion was a grand project of imperial expansion, designed to finally crush the rebellious Greek city-states. As a relatively new king, Xerxes was also under immense pressure to prove his strength. His ambition was on a scale that is hard for us to comprehend today. He ordered his engineers to build 2 massive pontoon bridges across the Hellespont, a strait over 1 kilometer wide, so his army could literally walk from Asia into Europe. He even commanded them to dig a massive canal across a peninsula, a feat of engineering so enormous it was meant to scream Persian power to the entire world.
And the army itself? The numbers you hear are always mind-boggling.
The ancient historian Herodotus claimed Xerxes' army was over 2 million strong, a number so vast he said they drank entire rivers dry. Modern historians agree that's an exaggeration. The logistics would have been impossible, but the reality is no less terrifying. Conservative estimates put the Persian land force at somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 soldiers. This wasn't just an army, it was a moving city. Their overwhelming numbers were both their greatest strength and their most critical weakness.
An unstoppable force. So what about the immovable object? How do you create a soldier like Leonidas, a man who doesn't just face death, but walks toward it as his destiny?
You start when he's 7 years old. You take him from his mother and father and throw him into the most brutal education system ever created, the Agoge. This wasn't a school, it was a forge for men. The boys were organized into packs and taught to see the state as their only true family.
I've heard stories that they were deliberately starved.
Yes, they were given just enough food to survive, forcing them to learn how to steal the rest. The crime wasn't theft, the crime was getting caught. If you were caught, you were beaten savagely, not for stealing, but for your carelessness. They walked barefoot to harden their feet. They were given only one cloak to wear for the entire year. Winter and summer. The entire purpose of the Agoge was to burn away individuality and forge a warrior whose loyalty was absolute, not to his family, but to Sparta and to the man standing next to him in the battle line.
So, with this perfect fighting force, why did they only send 300 men?
Because Sparta was a rigid society, and the invasion happened at the worst possible time, during the holy festival of the Carneia, a sacred period when Spartans were forbidden by law from going to war. To march with the full army would have been an act of sacrilege. So the legendary 300 wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was the only force Leonidas could legally and politically gather at short notice. His personal royal bodyguard, men who had all fathered sons, ensuring their family lines would not die out.
So the stage is set. The Persian horde arrives at the hot gates. For 4 days, nothing happens.
State your
The
purpose.
two armies just stare each other down across the pass. Xerxes, utterly confident, sends a messenger with a simple demand: hand over your arms. And Leonidas gives the most defiant, most famous reply in military history: Molen labe.
Come and get them. On the 5th day, Xerxes tried. He sent in 10,000 of his soldiers, expecting to simply crush the tiny Greek force. It was a slaughter. The Greeks formed their phalanx, a wall of overlapping bronze shields and a forest of 9-foot iron-tipped spears. The Persians, with their shorter spears and wicker shields, couldn't even get close. They broke against that wall of bronze and were cut to pieces. Xerxes, watching from a throne set up on a nearby hill, is said to have leaped to his feet in terror 3 times as he watched his men being annihilated.
And this is when he sends in his best troops, the immortals?
Exactly. Furious, he unleashed his elite, the 10,000 immortals. They were called immortals because their number was always kept at a perfect 10,000. If one man fell, another immediately took his place, creating an illusion of an unkillable force. But at Thermopylae, immortality met reality. In the tight confines of the pass, their elite status meant nothing. Their numbers were useless, and their armor was no match for the heavy bronze of the Spartans. The first day ended in a bloody, shocking defeat for the Persians. The second day was more of the same. By the end of day 2, the morale of the Persian army was shattered. The unstoppable force had been stopped dead.
2 days of impossible victory. The Greeks had proven that a few determined men could hold back an empire. But they couldn't defend against the threats that came from within their own ranks. On the second night, a man walks into Xerxes' camp, a local Greek, and he has a secret to sell.
His name was Ephialtes, and in a fitting twist of history, his name would eventually come to mean nightmare in the Greek language. Motivated by the promise of a rich reward, he told Xerxes about a hidden mountain track, a goat path that went up and over the mountain, completely bypassing the Greek defensive line.
The flanking route, the one thing they couldn't defend against.
The fatal flaw. Xerxes immediately dispatched his immortals, with Ephialtes himself leading the way through the darkness. Leonidas knew about the path. He had stationed 1,000 soldiers from Phocis to guard it. But at dawn, the Phocians were caught completely by surprise. They panicked and retreated, leaving the path wide open. The nightmare had come true. The betrayal came from one of their own.
The sun rises on the third day. Scouts bring the terrible news to Leonidas. He's trapped. The battle is lost. He has to make an impossible choice. Does he order a retreat to save his men? Or does he stay and fill that dark prophecy from Delphi?
He does both. He ordered the bulk of the allied Greek army to retreat immediately. Their fight was over. They needed to live to fight another day. But the Spartans stayed, and they weren't alone. This is a part of the story that is so often tragically forgotten. The 700 soldiers from the city of Thespi were given the same order to retreat. They were not bound by Spartan law. They were not fulfilling a prophecy. They were free men who were offered the chance to live, and they chose to stay and die alongside the Spartans. It was an act of breathtaking courage.
So what was that last stand actually like?
It was an explosion of pure fury. Knowing death was certain, the remaining Greeks no longer held the narrow pass. They advanced into the open, determined to kill as many Persians as they could before being overwhelmed. Herodotus describes them fighting with a recklessness born of desperation. When their spears shattered, they fought with swords. When their swords broke, they fought with their bare hands and their teeth. In the chaos, Leonidas fell. A brutal struggle erupted over his body, with the Greeks driving the Persians back 4 times to retrieve their fallen king. Finally, the last of them, wounded and exhausted, retreated to a small hill. There, surrounded, the Persians, unwilling to fight them hand to hand again, finished them off with a storm of arrows.
After the battle, a monument was erected on that hill. The poet Simonides wrote an inscription for the fallen Spartans. It perfectly captures their spirit. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie.
Asking the big picture question, bringing the story to its theme. They all died. The pass was taken. The Persians marched on. By any military definition, it was a catastrophic defeat. So why do we remember it as one of the most heroic moments in history?
Because the true victory lies in the aftermath. That 3-day delay was crucial. It bought just enough time for the Greek navy to withdraw in good order and for the city of Athens to be completely evacuated. But most importantly, the story of Thermopylae spread like wildfire. It was a moral victory that galvanized a fractured Greece into a unified force.
It transformed the war from a simple defense into a fight for the ideal of freedom itself. That spirit is what led directly to the stunning Greek victories later at the battles of Salamis and Plataea, which ultimately drove the Persians out of Greece for good.
So the true legacy isn't what happened on the battlefield, but the story that came from it.
Precisely. The tactical outcome was defeat, but the narrative outcome was an immortal victory. The story has echoed for 2,500 years, inspiring everyone from ancient artists to modern armies. In the end, the most enduring impact of Thermopylae wasn't military. It was the story. The story of the 300 became a weapon more powerful than any army, a cultural victory that has shaped our very definition of what it means to be a hero.